In brightest day,
in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's a slow news week so far, so I get to do a comic review day of. We're talking about Green Lantern #2 from writer Geoffrey Thorne, art by Dexter and Marco Santucci. Now, I'm going to say this. I think this is a good comic book. This is a highly recommend. There are a few issues with it that I have. But overall, I think this is much more exciting than the first issue. The first issue felt like an enormous info dump. If you watched my world building comic writing video that I did with Mark Pellegrini, we talked about don't overwhelm your audience with just massive amounts of information. Kind of felt like that's what the first issue was. A lot of politics, intergalactic politics, because you make it more boring. Now we finally get to see the fallout. Things definitely pick up. This is a wordy issue. There's still some of that to it, but there's a lot of change here. So if you are a big Green Lantern fan like myself, but you hate change, this might not be the comic issue for you. In fact, I imagine you will hate almost everything about it. This changes what we know about the Guardians of Oa. This is kind of changes what well, I don't know if it changes, but it ties some things into Jack Kirby's Fourth World. Certainly it starts exploring and maybe adding some new structure to the Omniverse. There's a lot of stuff going on in here, and that's just the stuff with all of DC. We've got major character deaths and things of that nature going on. And we can see, just like Superman, just like Batman, just like the Teen Titans, in a lot of these titles within DC Comics, we are heading towards Future State. Fortunately for Green Lantern, now I don't know exactly that the Future State story that we got from Geoffrey Thorne was a Green Lantern story because they didn't have rings or powers. That was one of the more interesting, intriguing stories that was in Future State that actually had potential. It wasn't the most bleak thing in the history of the world. Didn't make me want to hurt myself just for reading it. So that was a plus. So we now know Green Lantern is also heading to wherever Future State was. If you thought it was an alternate future, it is not. That is exactly where we're heading. This might be a game-changing issue, not just for Green Lantern, but for all of DC Comics universe. You're learning a lot of things here. Now let's get right into it. Let's talk about the art from Dexter and Marco Santucci. In the first issue, they both illustrated parts. Most of it was Dexter Marco Santucci did some flashback type scenes. Here, it doesn't really work that way, and I think it detracts from the overall art. The art from Dexter is beautiful. It's exactly what you'd expect from him. Nice, crisp, energetic pages, faces that display all kinds of emotions, just a very kinetic feel to it. When we get to this Marco Santucci stuff later on in the issue, there's a lot more cross-hatching. There's a lot more shadows. The faces are a lot more ambiguous as far as characteristics, as far as emoting, and they don't exactly blend well together. If this was all Dexter this would be like 4.5-star art. But because of the Marco Santucci stuff at the end, I would say it's like 3.5-star. It really detracts it. They don't go together very well. And that's one of the things I'm not enjoying about Green Lantern is we know that in July, the artist is going to be Tom Rainey and Marco Santucci. And then Dexter is going to be doing Suicide Squad. And like this week, there is a Suicide Squad, and that's Eduardo Pensica. So they're moving all their artists around at DC Comics, even though they just relaunched all these titles. I find that eminently frustrating. But the Dexter art in here, fantastic. The Marco Santucci art on its own, not as good, but together they don't really match. And I think that was a poor choice on DC Comics editorial staff. Now, getting into the story by Geoffrey Thorne, there is a lot going on. We know in the last issue there were some terrorist attacks. And we get the fallout. We know that one of the Guardians of Oa has fallen. And we get this funeral procession led by a new character, I believe. I don't think I've ever seen this Guardian. Her name's Nemesini, which is very similar to a character from like Wonder Woman lore. But as far as I know, is brand new, or if she's not new to Green Lantern lore, I'd never heard of her before, which I think is a bit odd. There's also some big changes, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But we get this nice, heavy funeral scene. Everybody's kind of mourning the loss. Guardian of Oa is his life force is being returned to the central power battery. I thought that was very appropriate. I enjoyed this moment of it. And there's a lot going on. She explains a ton. And it turns out because Oa is now part of the United Planets, the Green Lanterns are downsizing. They're giving 1/3 of their sectors control over to the United Planets, which have their own version, I guess, of the Justice League called the United. That's all kind of being introduced and worked out in Justice League by Brian Michael Bendis. And by the end, we see all these sectors essentially being abandoned by the Green Lantern Corps, and all these lanterns are being reassigned all over the place. And it's pure pandemonium. So we get this very powerful moment, and things just change right on a dime. It's time to get into business and the fallout of everything that's happened, not only with the death of the Guardian, but Oa joining up with the United Planets, and they start moving them all around. This is a big deal to John Stewart, who is the leader of the Green Lantern Corps, as well as a lot of the other Lanterns. We'll get into that here in a second, but there are a lot of revelations that happen in this comic book. I want to cover them now, just kind of the stuff that they're changing, altering, or maybe they're connecting throughout the DC Omniverse. The first thing that we learn, I don't know how to take this. I think a lot of people aren't going to enjoy this, and I don't know that I do. I think this could be a massive mistake as far as fundamentally changing who the Guardians of Oa are. I've always felt that they were a higher level of being than Earth and the inhabitants of the other planets that they're helping to protect. But this almost indicates that they're like not even of this Earth. Like they've been sent here to help. Certainly that's part of DC lore, but it's not part of Guardians of Oa kind of lore. But this is what Nemesini has to say regarding exactly what they are. We are not primates, not mammals. Despite our appearance, that we hold physical form at all is our choice, meant to put younger species at ease. So that is a massive change just as far as the Guardians of Oa. And then we get Geoffrey Thorne really answering some questions I think that we've all had. Why are there so many Earth Lanterns? And even answering some questions that we haven't really had that maybe we should have regarding the new structure of the Omniverse. First up, they do address the Earth Lanterns. Did you never wonder why all the planets in this galaxy, only yours has produced 7 Green Lanterns in the space of a single human lifetime? Or why we chose Oa as our home? Or why Mogo is a sentient world? They are more than connected, they are vital. Every universe has 7 crux worlds, planets where wonders happen to spur growth and evolution and preserve the life of that cosmos. Your Earth is the crux of heroes. When the current pantheon of new gods fades away, Earth will become the so-called 5th world, obviously tying into Jack Kirby's 4th world. You said 7. I only see 5 planets here, so there's 5 planets depicted. 2 were lost. We failed to prevent the destruction of Krypton, and the other is your failure. You remember what happened on Santucci, of course, the planet that John Stewart himself destroyed. As far as I can tell, and I kind of cross-referenced this from another review, and they seem to kind of agree with it, these are the 7 crux worlds: Earth, Oa, Mogo, Krypton, which has been lost, Santucci, which has been lost, and then the 2 new worlds, Elseworld and Earth Omega, which have been introduced in Dark Knight's Death Metal. So now those are the 7 crux worlds, and the Earth Lanterns have been sent to all of these worlds to protect them, because these are like the core worlds that need to keep going on. They've already lost Krypton, they lost Santucci, and Hal Jordan himself has been selected to protect Earth. So maybe we will see him in the larger DC Comics universe if we're not going to see him in this Green Lantern series. I think some of these changes will be controversial. It certainly starts spelling out and identifying maybe some of the structure involved within the Omniverse. Within the Omniverse, you have universes. In every universe, you have 7 crux worlds that must be protected, kind of thing. So we do get a lot of revelations just as far as not only in the Green Lantern lore, but the larger scale DC universe. Now, this story is very much about John Stewart himself, his leadership, and the burden that he holds. At the very beginning, he's having to tell all the Green Lanterns that are not on Oa what has happened as far as the terrorist attacks. There have been Green Lanterns lost. There was a Guardian lost. And it's his burden to share this information with his corps that he's the leader of. After this more burden of being a leader, he has to confront the Guardians themselves about, why did you make all these sweeping changes? You didn't consult anyone. You never told anybody these changes were going to happen. What the hell were you thinking? You couldn't have rolled out this any worse. Everybody is losing their mind because of all the things that have happened. And that's when they start spelling out all the information kind of we just covered in the Revelations. And he points out, he's like, well, there's 7 crux worlds. There's 7 human lanterns. 2 of them are missing. What are I and Guy Gardner, the two that had not been assigned worlds, what are we to do? They explained, well, Guy Gardner has another purpose, but you are going to take 1,000 lanterns on this ship and you're going to go to the dark sectors. You wouldn't be able to penetrate the dark sectors and monitor this space that we have no insight in. We have no idea what's actually going on out there. And you're going to go out there and you're going to patrol this that we've never done before. Now, there's been a lot of things happening on Oa. They just joined the United Planets. Terrorists attacked. They've lost lanterns. They lost one of the Guardians of Oa. They've shut down 1/3 of their sectors. They've reassigned new positions to all these lanterns. Why they would decide now is the time for John Stewart to take 1,000 lanterns and depart is beyond me. It makes no sense whatsoever, but I guess this is what Geoffrey Thorne needed to do to push the story along and get these Green Lanterns out, dispersed in the galaxy like we saw in Future State, where they will end up essentially abandoned and powerless, but still trying to uphold the mission of the Green Lantern Corps. You can definitely tell that Geoffrey Thorne has a love and a respect for John Stewart. I agree with him that John Stewart has not been highlighted like he should. There are a lot of character traits. There's a lot of history to the character that are very admirable. Obviously, he had the issue with Santucci, which is very unfortunate. That is part of his history. He has redeemed his character and certainly establishes himself as one of the truly great leaders of Green Lantern Corps. And in that respect, if they wanted to highlight John Stewart in this series and really start elevating him, they probably picked the right guy in Geoffrey Thorne, because he's definitely doing this. It almost feels like a love letter to the burden placed on John Stewart and how he's able to deal with it and still lead the Corps despite all the massive changes that are happening within it. Now, there's some very heavy stuff that happens after John Stewart departs. Near the end, we find out Simon Baz is going to be taking care of, I think her name is Kelly, or is it Keely? One or the other. The Teen Lantern, the Guardians of Oa, still want to check out that gauntlet. She thinks she's a Green Lantern. They're like, you're not a Green Lantern yet. You have some powers, but you're not a Green Lantern. And she's talking to Simon Baz, and she says, what's wrong with the big battery? Talking about the central battery. And it's destroyed. It explodes. And this is the big event. We know this is leading up to Future State. We saw it in Future State. The central power battery is no more, and the lanterns themselves no longer function in the somewhat near future. And it appears, because we do get this montage of Oa and Vanishing Point and Vega and Warworld, that there's probably some type of conspiracy. Like I said, why would John Stewart have abandoned the planet with 1,000 Green Lanterns right after there's 2 terrorist attacks? There's a 3rd terrorist attack, destroys the central power battery. There's no way that we didn't just get introduced to this Guardian of Oa. Well, I'm pretty certain this is the first time we've met her, Nemesini, if she isn't behind all of this. She's clearly the person that is responsible for the terrorist attacks, that was orchestrating the whole thing, and I believe we'll probably get that revelation within the next, I don't know, 6 issues, maybe 10 issues. At least that's my guess. Just the fact that you've never seen her before, and all of a sudden everything's blowing up and we lose the central power battery. Now, there are some very big fallouts from this. We see a lantern has returned to Oa, is monitoring, looking for survivors. There are no Green Lanterns that have survived, according to her ring. It is a her. But there is a life force, it turns out, that is Teen Lantern herself. She's holding Simon Baz's body. Not only have we lost a Guardian of Oa, we have lost one of the human lanterns that was supposed to protect the Crux world. We've lost Simon Baz. He's dead. I've been saying that DC Comics needs to cull the human lanterns, that there are too many of them. They finally establish why there's this many, and then they go and kill one. I imagine JoJo will be replacing Simon Baz as the official 7th Earth Lantern, because they still need that many, apparently, just according to the Guardians of Oa. It's a very sad sight. Clearly, Teen Lantern is very distressed. I will say that she's probably the most annoying part of the entire story. Her speaking Spanish during this makes no sense. Wes, you hate Spanish. No, that has nothing to do with this. This is the Green Lanterns. There are 1,000 languages being spoken in the Green Lantern Corps. And when you're reading the comic, all of them are translated. Why aren't hers? I understand that's something Brian Michael Bendis was doing with the character in like Young Justice and stuff. But she's moved books now. This is the Green Lantern book. All the languages are always translated into English for the reader. So I find that annoying, and I'm not a big fan of her personality. But I will say I was not a big fan of Ahsoka Tano during the first few seasons of Star Wars Clone Wars, and that character grew on me, and she ended up becoming not one of my favorites, but definitely a character I respected and had an attachment to. So perhaps they will be able to pull that off with Teen Lantern. I'm not so certain. I imagine the arrival of JoJo Mullins into our DC universe from the was that Young Animal universe with Bar Sector is supposed to be a big deal here. Completely overshadowed by the loss of Simon Baz, a character that we actually know and love. I maintain that JoJo looks ridiculous. The glasses are stupid. The haircut is equally ludicrous in my mind. And that she could definitely do with the character redesign. And if you didn't know, this character has usurped Batman, Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne used to be the world's greatest detective. This is the multiverse's, well, I guess the Omniverse's greatest detective. If you didn't know that in JoJo Mullins, that was clearly established in Future State. And that will wrap up my review of Green Lantern number 2. I have a feeling this will be a controversial issue. A lot of people are going to hate what they saw in here. And I can understand that. There is a large-scale changes in here. Things that have never been established are now established. The Guardians of Oa have been around for a long time. To receive this kind of revelation now seems like we would have already known this with the amount of time that they've been in the galaxy. But we shall see how Geoffrey Thorne pulls it off. We are heading to Future State, folks. The central power battery is no more. We know 1,000 Lanterns are in the dark sector under the guidance of John Stewart, seemingly lost to the world. We do know they don't lose the faith, and they will eventually start freeing planets, even though they don't have the use of their rings. There were a lot of things established just regarding the Omniverse. There's connective tissue into Jack Kirby's Fourth World. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Love the art by Dexter Soy. The art by Marco Santucci does not hold up in comparison and does not really match. It's off-putting, and I think it kind of takes you out of the story. Hopefully they stop doing that, even though we know they won't, because in July we will have Tom Rainey and Marco Santucci on art. I think they should probably just have one artist on this comic book, but that is my opinion. This is a strong 4-star, highly recommend. If all the art was from Dexter Soy, this would be a 4.5-star, verging on a 5-star comic book. I do think the Marco Santucci stuff really detracts from the overall story just as far as cohesion. But in my humble opinion, this is a good comic book. It's not just a good comic book. This is a really good comic book. Is it extremely fun? I wouldn't go that far, but it is very revealing. And we shall see where Geoffrey Thorne takes John Stewart and the Green Lantern Corps in the not-too-distant future. This could be great, but I have to acknowledge this could also be terrible. It just all depends on the execution and what they end up doing with it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.